regional summits this year because I've been doing other stuff. I've been on the road a lot. But when I got asked to come here, I just wanted to. And this is a region for me that is near and dear to my heart. It's been, in a lot of ways, also a frustrating region. And you guys have had a lot of ups and downs. You know, when Dave drives around all these capitals, or I'm flying in and out of all these capitals, sometimes it's the easy work that I feel like we do because we're in and out, right? You guys are on the ground, you're in the battle day in and day out in your own capitals, with your own, dealing with your own grassroots, constituents in all the different districts. There are a lot of highs and lows when you're doing that stuff. There's a different perspective you get when you do what Dave does. He does a little bit more than what you do because he's on the ground with you guys. I get a completely different perspective because I'm kind of in and out, right? And I drop into the Capitol. You guys might have a surge day, or there's a hearing, and I'm supposed to come in for that hearing. And so I think in a lot of ways, my job's just easier. And I get all the credit and a lot of the glory, and none of that deserved, while you guys are doing all the hard work. And everything I end up doing is on your backs. And so I just want you to know how much I appreciate that. And a lot of times I feel, for lack of a better term, I feel guilty about that. Because I know how hard it is what you guys do on the ground. And the reason I know is because I am a grassroots activist. You know, I came up in grassroots politics. I never intended to lead an organization, to found an organization, to grow an organization. I have no intention to do politics. I never wanted to be on TV or on the radio or any of this stuff. This is not intentional. I just got led by God into grassroots politics. And I think the reason I did is because, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, I just love people. And when I look around across America, when I come to a room like this, when I come to your capitals, when I go like I was a couple of days ago to West Monroe, Louisiana, and I just meet people on the ground, I have a lot of faith in America because of that. Because America is still filled with amazing, incredible, wonderful, genius-filled, God-filled people. That's what this country is filled with. And so my perspective is biased in that I see that everywhere I go all over the country. I would say one of the hardest things for me in my job that maybe you guys don't see, and Dave gets this too, is that when you are working a region, or when you're working a whole country, every single difficult thing that happens in that region belongs to you as well. And so if you go into a state capital, when I fly into a state capital, and I'm there for a vote, and then the vote goes poorly, and then I leave, and I leave you guys to clean up the mess, which is really hard. My job is then to go out to my car and to get on an airplane and go to the next state and pretend that that loss didn't just happen. And I feel that loss just as deeply as you guys do. So it's kind of a weird dichotomy of, I leave you behind, I know you're doing all the hard work and the rough stuff, and I'm going out and I'm trying to shut that out. And I mean, I can remember so many instances specifically of this happening where I was at a Capitol, I just felt like I got punched in the gut, and then I got to walk out, and I literally got to get on a plane and go to the next state and be in the next hearing and just kind of put that behind. That stuff adds up, though. You get some scars on your back from doing that enough years, and we've been doing this a lot of years. You know, Dave and I have been in this 10 years. I know a bunch of you have been around almost that long. When you do that, there are a lot of scars. There's a lot of high points too, right? When you get out of a committee hearing, ultimately when you pass the state, when what happens in Nebraska happened, that was just, for me, that was one of the big highs of all time. So you guys, it was so incredible how that came down. So this journey through politics is a journey of peaks and valleys. It's life. Right? This is your life. It's my life. It's always this way. There are the highs and the lows. And so for me, one of the things that I've learned as I go through all these highs and lows, and I do it in microcosm, like sometimes you get highs and lows in a week, sometimes it's through a whole legislative season. And we've been through a rough season this year. We've had some highs, but we haven't passed any states. So that's a very rough legislative season. When you do that and you experience a bunch of lows, the thing for me that brings me through those lows, that lets me walk through that valley, there's three things for me. One is, first and foremost, is my faith. And I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, and that's where I turn when I'm struggling. I turn to prayer Abraham Lincoln said, I often find myself upon my knees because I don't know where else to turn. Right? And so I find that a lot. It's been one of those years for me. My family's had some troubles. Dad had some big health stuff. We just had to put him into memory care a few weeks ago. A lot of lows and something like that. And so what I do is I learn to lean on my faith. For me, we're supposed to count it all as joy, right? I've been struggling with that scripture lately. Count it all as joy. It doesn't feel like joy. And so I've been studying that, trying to figure out what that means for me when I go through tough stuff. What does it mean to count it all as joy? And what it's supposed to mean, I think, from everything I've been studying and trying to lean into lately, is it means that I count it as joy because it is joyous to use that to build our endurance in our faith and thus perfect our faith. And so the hard times do that for us when we're in the valley. So I turn to faith. For me, I feel very blessed. The second place I turn is to my family. I'm really blessed to have a wife that does this full time with me. A lot of you have had a chance to meet Patty. And so that means that when I go home and something's been really rough, she's going through it too. She knows exactly what's going on. She's experiencing the same kind of stuff I'm experiencing, the same blowback. She's doing it, dealing with the donors, and whatever's going on, we're experiencing that together. I don't know if you guys all know this, but at this point, my daughter Lucy works for the organization. Her last name is Vanderlaan, if you haven't met her yet. I don't talk about that widely because we don't like to do like, oh, it's my family, that's in our organization. We brought Lucy in. She was a Hillsdale College graduate. So I'll hire pretty much anybody who comes out of Hillsdale College. We hired a bunch of them. They're extraordinary young people. And she came in and she was our assistant director of operations. And when Ramona DeSalvo moved on and she moved over to Daily Wire, doing a great job over there, Lucy got elevated. She's our director of operations. So I'm really blessed because I have two family members who feel the pain and who know exactly what's going on when things are rough. And I turn to the rest of my family too. I'm really blessed. I'm a close family. I've got a great son who's a lawyer in Washington, D.C. Was in the Marine Corps for 4 years. Now he works for America First Legal. We talk every single day. I was just texting with them about one of their cases. So we all commiserate together when we're in that valley, when any one of us is in that valley. And I'm especially blessed because I have all of y'all. So when it's rough, I don't pretend that it's not rough. I mean, this is an interesting leadership style choice that we all have to make. There are the leaders who will tell you everything's always okay, and they'll always be rah-rah, and they'll always just be cheering you on. And then there are the leaders who will tell you, yeah, I'm kind of bummed out right now, and things suck. And because that's true. And one of the things Dave said, and I consider this a high compliment, is whatever you see, whether it's battle cry, or you see me in a legislature, or you see me here, you're just going to get the real me. I don't believe in doing there's the image mark, and then there's the real mark. That, to me, is a lack of integrity. You know, in marketing, we call that brand integrity. Does the brand live up to the promise? And I just think it's just integrity. Integrity means you're an integral person. What you are inside, that's what we try to be outside, and vice versa. So that's what we get. So I'm blessed because when things get rough, when I'm in a valley, I got Dave Schneider, right? I got all of you guys. I can talk to any of you. I can get on a call with you. And you guys tend to elevate me anytime I'm with you. But the valleys happen. I think the question in our lives when we're dealing with valleys is, how long do you spend in the valley? That's usually a choice. You know, we have three things that we absolutely control in our own lives. We control who we trust, we control what we do, and we control what our attitude is about what happens to us. We're all going to end up in the valley, and the question is, what happens to our attitude when we're in the valley? Because our attitude is always, it goes into a hole, right? We always take a dip in our attitude when we're in the valley. We experience a defeat, whether it's politically, personally, lose a job, don't get a client, kid does something that really disappoints you, personal difficulties in your personal life. All of those things are valleys. And the question is, how resilient are we? And that's about our attitude and how fast we turn around. But it's also about who we trust. Because if you've got good people in your life that you can trust, you can turn to those people. They'll reach down into that valley and they'll give you a hand and they'll pull you up and out of that valley. And we get out of those valleys and then we get in going up the mountains, and we're climbing up the mountains, we're having victories along the way. We get up to the next ledge and the next ledge, and sometimes we reach the peak of that mountain in a particular pursuit in our lives. Maybe it's in your state where you pass convention of states and you're standing on that mountaintop. And then the question is, what's your attitude when you're on the mountaintop? And I think this is a super important question for folks, because a lot of people get to the mountaintop, and what they think is, I'm so proud of myself, and they pump their fist, I made it to the top of the mountain. I can assure you that if that's your attitude, you'll be back in the valley pretty quickly. Right? That's just natural. That's what happens, because the reality is you got to the top of the mountain thanks to God, thanks to your friends, thanks to your family, thanks to your team. You didn't get to the top of that mountain by yourself.
Yeah.
And so that humility, when you get to the top of the mountain, there's cause to celebrate. We should always celebrate that. But we should remember we're not going to spend a lot of time up there. Life mostly isn't spent at the top of the mountain. At some point, we're going to be back in that valley, and then the question, we just repeat it, right? How long are we going to spend down in the valley? It's always peaks and cycles. In servant leadership, if you've taken the servant leadership class, this is part of just what we call the project mood curve. Every project has this. You're going to go through peaks and valleys. So we do this in Convention of States, and we do it locally. We do it in our own district. We do it in our own personal involvement in Convention of States. Sometimes you might feel like, I don't even know why I'm doing this. You know, the legislature does something crazy and stupid. Maybe we get within one vote of passing somewhere. We have a tie chamber, and because of that, we don't pass, and it's infuriating. And you think, I don't even know if I'm going to come back next year. Like, I don't even know why I'm doing this anymore. I'll be honest with you, once in a while I feel that way. I leave the state, and I'm just like, I don't know what to do. Dave and I have had some states where we walk out of the Capitol, and I'm like, hey, Dave, what do we do now? And he goes, I don't know. It's like, what do you do when you don't know what to do? Right? And for me, the answer is you just keep going. Right? So you put that attitude behind you. I don't know what to do, so I'm just going to one foot in front of the other. I'm just going to keep going. And this is the cycle of politics inevitably. And we have to remember this about politics generally on a broad scale. Politics swings on a pendulum, right? If you look at all of human history as a pendulum, that pendulum swings back and forth, generally speaking, between tyranny on one side, right? And on the other side, really bad tyranny. The pendulum's been a little bit broken in our country because somehow it ended up on this thing called liberty. This is not the normal state of existence in world affairs for all of human history. Right? We have sort of skipped a beat on the metronome of history that swings back and forth from tyranny to really bad tyranny, and somehow we jumped the track and we ended up on liberty, and we've been stuck here for 200 plus years. It's really extraordinary, and it's not going to last unless we make it last. These are dark times. The nation is divided, right? Anybody disagree with that?
No.
I've not seen it like this in my lifetime. I'm 61 years old. So I'm getting up there in years. I've seen quite a bit. My first vote was for Ronald Reagan. So, you know, I came in a proud, dyed-in-the-wool conservative. That was my first vote. And I never thought that I would see the day that I'm seeing today. So we're so divided. I hear people say we're as divided as we've ever been in our history. I don't think that's true. We've had a civil war. Might have another one. But we've been divided in our history. You know, if you look at all of our history, if you go all the way back to the beginning of American history, and you go back even before we had a nation, when we were the colonies, we were very divided. The colonies hated each other, right? You guys know the story of the colonies. They were primarily Christian sectarian colonies. And they hated each other, one, because they were all foreign to each other. And this was kind of radical. It's hard for us to imagine this. This morning I woke up in Austin. The night before I was in Monroe, Louisiana. Here I am this evening in Nebraska. We can go anywhere in a day in the United States of America. Back then, the average person never went more than 20 miles from their own town. Most people never left their own town. Right? So you think about the difference between the colonies, they were foreign countries. And they were exotic foreign countries because you may meet somebody from there, but you may not. You certainly didn't have photographs of those places, right? You didn't have radios or televisions where you could learn about those places. Those were foreign lands. So they didn't trust each other, and they didn't really like each other. And so they were very divided. And there was something that drove them together, though. There was an existential threat. The king said that he was going to start telling them all what to do. He was going to control everything that they did. The Declaratory Act is the reason for the American Revolution. The king says, I can tell you all what to do whenever I want, wherever I want, however I want. Parliament stamps that, and the colonies come together, And then because of that existential threat to their liberty, they fight a war, right? We all know about the American Revolution. All y'all are good students. You've studied that on your own. We come out of that war. When we come out of that war, we are, as a country, completely united. Brothers in arms, we had fought in the trenches next to each other. People from different colonies that previous to that didn't even know each other. They come out of that, and everybody loves each other, right? That's not how the story goes. Right? They dislike each other so much, they distrust each other so much that they create the Articles of Confederation, which is a federal form of government that's so weak that there's no control, that there's really no centralized government. And they do that because they're saying to each other, I don't trust you, I don't like you, you are like a complete foreigner to me, there's no way I'm giving you any power over my state. And so we end up with this loose confederation of states, and it's a complete and total failure. We know the story in 1787. They get together, actually important to note, in 1786, September, October 1786, they get together in Annapolis for the Annapolis Convention. That's a convention, by the way, that says, oh, we don't have the authority to do the things that we think we need to do, so we're going to go ask for more authority. The first not runaway convention, right? And so after Annapolis, they have the 1787 convention. You know about that. The good thing about that convention is that's a point in American history where the colonies get together, or the states of the Confederacy get together, and everybody gets together in a room kind of like this, right? And they all hang out together, and it's very peaceable. No? I thought they all just liked each other.
No.
Right? They all just drank tea together, or went and had ales at the ale. No! They didn't like each other. They didn't trust each other. They yelled at each other. They called each other names. Ben Franklin recounts that 3 times the entire convention almost disbanded. He turned to the Lord in prayer and said, we've got to pray to keep this together. Right? They did keep it together. We know what happens after that. We get this incredible form of government. We get this amazing system of governance like nothing we've ever seen before in all of human history. The average constitution in the entire world lasts 17 years. We are now almost 250 years. Absolutely incredible. This form of government called federalism. It's a constitutional republic based on federalism. Federalism is a form of government designed for people who hate each other. The really is, think about the bargain. What we're saying is, I don't like you, I don't trust you, I'm not giving you any power over me, but there's an existential threat, and we have to do some things together, or we're not going to survive. Right? It was not a kumbaya moment. I mean, they went out, the ratification debates were intense. People were very accusatory. Federalists and the anti-federalists going at it tooth and nail in the public sphere, right? In the media, in the newspapers, in the pamphleteers. Ultimately, we ratify that Constitution. That's the point in American history where total cooperation and unity breaks out, right? No. I mean, we like each other so much that by the 1860s we decided to have a civil war. And this is how fractious this nation has always been. We have a civil war, and at the end of that civil war, we hate each other so much that we actually have to force a union on half of the country. We force them into a country. So this idea that we're a unified country, this idea, and this drives me crazy, this slogan, I think we misinterpreted, e pluribus unum, from many one. Like we're all the same, we're all one big happy family. That's not how it works. That's not how it's ever worked in the United States of America. So after the Civil War, though, the good news is that's when everything really starts to calm down and we all start to work together, right? No. That doesn't happen. The single point of unity that I will point to in American history where I think we actually, as a country, become unified is World War II. In World War II, across generational lines, across color barriers, across socioeconomic barriers, everybody's sacrificing. People are buying war bonds, people are recycling, everybody knows somebody who's gone off to war and didn't come back home. Every family is affected. Right, so this is a national point of unity. I want you to understand why and think about what's going on in this through line that goes through. What's going on is an existential threat. This is where humans, we tend to rally together when there is an existential threat that we recognize. We can get together, we can put aside our differences when there's an existential threat. So that happens in World War II. After World War II, the boys come home, those who come home, and we have the GI Bill, and we have one of those prosperous storied periods in American history, the 1950s, right? This is where you get the idea of the American dream, the white picket fence, the house in the suburbs, the 2 kids, the dog in the yard, all of that stuff comes post-World War II in what is a fairly unified period in American history. I like to think of the United States of America in my mind in a picture. I think of the Liberty Bell. I think that's a really good symbol for the United States of America. Probably all of you can picture the Liberty Bell. One of the most prominent things that you picture when you picture the Liberty Bell is the crack in the Liberty Bell. Right? And that crack relieved pressure when the Liberty Bell was forged, right? So if you think of Liberty Bell, we still think of Liberty Bell as a beautiful symbol of liberty, but it has this big crack in it. Well, around the 1940s, 1950s, we start to paper mache over that crack. We get the unity of World War II. We get the unity of national media. First national radio media, where we're all listening to the same programs. Families gather around their radios at night and they're listening to old-time radio dramas, old-time radio comedies, music. Lots of people across the country listening to the same thing. This is the first time in American history that culture starts to become a national thing. Right? In the 1950s, you get the big 3 networks, ABC, NBC, CBS television networks. Now we're talking national television broadcasting. You can be in Mississippi, and you could be in Manhattan, in New York, and you could still be watching the same television programs together. That's pretty incredible. Out of that, out of the radio and the television broadcasting, you get national brands. You get things like Borax soap and Lucky Strike cigarettes. You start to smoke the same cigarettes in New York as you are in Louisiana. As we roll into the 1960s, the major league sports out of the 50s and into the 60s are growing, and we're all watching the same sports leagues and rooting and challenging each other over the same teams and the same leagues. That's a culture, that's another layer of paper mache over the Liberty Bell. It's getting thicker, it's covering that crack. We all seem the same, we're consuming the same culture, the same products, the same media. The culture is becoming more monolithic nationally. We still have our differences, but there's a paper mache veneer going over that Liberty Bell. And this continues to get franchising in the 1960s. Prior to the 1960s, not really a lot of franchising. By the end of the 1960s, you can literally go all over the country and eat at the same restaurants, stay in the same hotel chains, buy your gasoline from the same gas stations. In fact, by the end of the 1960s into the 1970s, you could drive from Biloxi, Mississippi to Manhattan, New York, and along the way, you could get your gas at the same gas station. You could buy your Lucky Strike cigarettes at those same gas stations all along the way. You could eat at the same fast food restaurants along the way. You could stay in the same hotels along the way. And when you got to New York, you would recognize the food. By the way, that was not true in the 1920s, in the late 1800s. If you went from Mississippi to New York, and you got to New York, you were a foreigner prior to all of this cultural assimilation. So by the 1960s, it seems like we're all the same. And then we get into the 1970s, and in the 1970s, we have the era of unfettered big government. Okay, so here's a pop quiz. You won't be held responsible for this, but tell me, who was the champion of small government in Washington, D.C. in the 1970s? Nobody. That's the answer.
Right.
You can look at history, look up the term small government. Who was giving speeches in Congress about fiscal responsibility, about small government, about limited government, about constitutional principles? The answer is nobody. So this is now, big government is the thing. We talk about the economies of scale, right? It was better. We're all the same. We're watching the same TV, same sports, same food, same culture, and that paper mache over that bell is thick. You can't even see the crack anymore, right? So we decide everything gets done from the center. It all gets done from Washington, D.C. That's the era, by the way, where we get new agencies given to us by a Republican president. We can't even imagine that today. Like if I told you, oh, we're going to have a Republican president and he's going to give us some new administrative agencies, you'd say, no, you're crazy. Republicans don't do that. Yeah, they did in the 1970s. Thank you, Richard Nixon. Right? And so this was the era of big government. And you move forward into where we're at today, and we're all the same, and everything's from Washington, D.C., and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. That paper mache gets thicker and thicker, and it seemed forever and ever we were just going to be the same. But something took place in the 1960s underneath and inside that Liberty Bell, below the paper mache. We had the Vietnam War. And during the Vietnam War, something changed in our culture. And something started to break into our culture. And there were psychedelic drugs everywhere. There's nudity everywhere. There's craziness in the streets. We had race riots in the 1960s. People throwing Molotov cocktails at police officers. Looked a lot like the Summer of Love of 2020, right? This is the 1960s that started happening. And that stuff continued to bubble up under the surface in the United States of America. You know, if I was the age I am now, and it was the late 60s, and I was watching all of those protests, I probably would have been looking out and thinking, I don't know what the hell is going on. What happened to my country? And I know there are people who are my age back then who were thinking those things. And if we fast forward to today, where we're at right now in our country's history, I'll give you my perspective on the country. And I'm always very blunt about who I am and the lens through which I look at our country. 61 years old, I'm a white, middle-class guy, I'm a Bible-believing Christian, I'm a gun rights fanatic, right? That's who I am. I'm a Tea Party guy. I'm proudly all of those things. And when I look out across our political landscape now, this is what I see. I used to see Democrats who thought differently than I did. And they believed some different things than I did about the size and scope of government. But they were still my neighbors, and a lot of them were still my friends, and we could sit down over a beer, we might have gone to church together, we worked together, we certainly didn't hate each other for the most part, and that was my perspective. And now when I look out there today, what I see is a lot of people who are telling me that it's okay to kill babies up to the time they come out of the womb, and maybe afterwards. And I don't think, wow, we're having a debate about abortion, I just think, well, that's evil. And that's not wrong. That's not something nuanced that we can debate. That's murder. I mean, and by the way, just to be clear, I'm stridently pro-life. I think it's murder after conception. But when people are talking about killing babies right before they come out of the womb or after they come out, that's a whole other world. And we're talking human sacrifice, Moloch level, pagan human sacrifice. And I just say that's evil. We live in a time now when in our schools, they are teaching our kids this stuff that they call critical race theory. What that means is racism. Just straight up racism. Like they're teaching our kids to be racist. If you're white, you're an oppressor. If you're not white, you're a victim. You should not like each other. You people who are people of color should hate the white people. They're teaching our kids to be racist. When I was growing up, and I remember this distinctly, the words of Martin Luther King were a given. It was not like a debate. It wasn't something we just, is this right? Is this, judge a person by the content of their character, not the color of their skin, right? It was baked in. And now we're teaching our kids racism. That's not just wrong, that's evil. It is a different thing that's going on in the country right now. You look at what they're doing with gender ideology. Now, this is just insanity. And they call it gender ideology. You know, I call it insanity. That's what it is. This is not sane, it's not rational. There isn't a real debate to be had about this because men are men and women are women. And if this was being broadcast on YouTube right now, I'm banned for saying it. Literally, they tell us that there are, I don't know how many genders, 57 genders, 500 genders. They tell us that people are born with immutable sexual characteristics, but men can be women, women can be men, both or neither, either or both. You can be whatever you want, any given, like it's insanity. That's evil. That's not just wrong, that's evil. I look out at all of this stuff that they're doing. I'm from Texas, I look at our southern border right now. Minimum 10,000 people a day crossing that border. This is not illegal immigration. This is an invasion taking place. Right. An invasion being promoted by hostile adversaries, by China, by Mexico, by other countries that dislike us, by our own government in Washington, D.C. This is not something about which we should be having a policy debate. This is evil. This is what we're facing in our time. Okay, this is my perspective as Mark Meckler, 61-year-old Christian white conservative guy. Here's the other perspective. people on the other side of the aisle, on the other side of political ideology, would see me standing up here, would listen to what I'm saying, and they would look at me and they would say, that guy's a racist, that guy's a homophobe, that guy's a misogynist, that guy's an Islamophobe, that guy's a Neanderthal. You know what? That guy's just a Nazi who deserves to die. That's what they would say. And they would say, and I would say, looking at each other, I'm not sure I can live in a country with people like that. Anybody feel that way? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's where we're at as a country. It's a pretty rough place to be, right? And a lot of people lament this fact. People are really anxious about it. People are really upset about it. People are trying to figure out how do we fix that? Like, how do we deal with the fact that we hate each other so much? Here's my perspective on all of that, on that whole dark, dismal picture I just told you. It's awesome. I'm super excited about it. This is right where we need to be. And this is why I said that. I painted all this history for you. We've always been a country that has been at each other's throats. This division is one of the strongest things we have as a country, is that people in New York really are different from people in Mississippi, who really are different from people in Colorado, who really are different from people in California. Well, maybe not that so much anymore. Sorry, Colorado. I don't want to Colorado. We really are different. And when the left says diversity is our strength, they're talking about skin color. I'm talking about diversity really is our strength. The fact that people are different, have different perspectives, different ways of living their lives, different ways of looking at things. That's a good thing. But it takes a particular government structure to make that stick together. And the glue that makes that work, the only glue that's flexible enough, is the glue of federalism. When we centralize everything, when we shove everything down everybody's throats from Washington, D.C., everybody's angry. It's the Biden administration, the leftists, the Marxists, the communists. I hate when they're in power. And I'm angry about it every day. I'm frustrated about it every day. And from their perspective, when Trump was in power and McConnell, and you get the Republicans in charge, it's horrible, it's terrible, it's bad. You know what? If they didn't have all that power in Washington, D.C., none of us would feel this way. We'd all be okay if all those decisions were now not so centralized in Washington, D.C. So what we've seen since the 1960s is that Liberty Bell is flexing, the paper mache is torn, and we can see the crack fully again. Now what I fear, and the one thing that I worry about, is that crack is going to continue to crack, and it's going to go all the way through that Liberty Bell, and it's going to break it into pieces. I hear people tell me that they want that. People say to me when I travel around, and this comes from, especially from people on the right aisle, people come up to me at a meeting like this or at a church. So somebody came up to me at a church in West Monroe, Louisiana 2 nights ago and said, you know, I think we just need a good old civil war. You know, I'm heavily armed, me and all my friends are armed, they can come down here to West Monroe, try to tell us what to do. Right? And this is, I hear this from people. And what I said to him, what I say to people is, I asked him, have you ever been in combat, sir? Are you a veteran? And he was not. And by the way, I never have been either. But I talked to a lot of folks who have. And you say that